Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our event 6 MONEV Safari Series, Monitoring and Evaluation Seminar, Evaluation with a Gender Perspective in the Implementation of Minimum Service Standards, or MSS Policy for Integrated Services for Women and Children Victims of Violence, Reflections from Indonesia, and Lessons from Global Good Practices. Before we start the seminar, let me inform you about the webinar rules. Selamat siang Bapak dan Ibu yang telah hadir. Selamat datang pada acara rangkaian ke-6 MONEV Safari, evaluasi.
Hilang suaranya, Mbak.
Evaluasi perspektif gender dalam penerapan kebijakan standar pelayanan minimum atau SPM untuk layanan terpadu bagi perempuan dan anak korban kekerasan. Refleksi dari Indonesia dan pelajaran dari praktik baik global. Bapak dan Ibu, sebelum seminar dimulai, izinkan saya untuk membacakan peraturan webinar. Before we start the seminar, make sure that you have a stable internet connection and keep your position in a quiet and comfortable room. After entering the Zoom room, make sure to change the name to the format as below, name and institution or organization by clicking on the rename option on your Zoom profile. Make sure to turn off your microphone during the speaker session for mutual comfort. If there are any questions, during the session, you can type in the chat box or using the raise hand feature to be given the opportunity to speak after being appointed by the moderator. We ask the participants to fill in feedback and also a clear name for the sake of the certificate after the event. The feedback link will be given in the chat box, and this seminar will be delivered in English, but subtitle in Bahasa will be provided in the chat box. Bapak dan Ibu, mohon dipastikan untuk mempunyai koneksi internet yang stabil dan usahakan posisi dalam ruangan yang hening dan nyaman. Setelah masuk ke dalam ruang Zoom, pastikan untuk mengganti nama dengan format nama dan juga institusi dengan cara klik opsi rename pada profil Zoom Bapak dan Ibu semua. Pastikan untuk mematikan mikrofon selama paparan berlangsung untuk kenyamanan bersama. Apabila ada pertanyaan selama sesi berlangsung, Bapak dan Ibu bisa mengetik pada kolom chat atau juga dengan memanfaatkan fitur raise hand untuk kemudian nanti akan diberikan kesempatan berbicara setelah ditunjuk oleh moderator. Kami mohon kepada para peserta untuk bersedia mengisi umpan balik dan juga nama jelas serta nama yang lengkap untuk nanti kepentingan sertifikat setelah acara. Tautan untuk mengisi umpan balik akan diberikan pada kolom chat. Bapak dan Ibu, seminar ini akan disajikan dalam dua bahasa, dalam bahasa Inggris, namun untuk translate-nya atau untuk artinya akan diberikan pada kolom chat. The seminar will be hosted by Ria Dwi Ismail as our Program and Operations Officer at MONEV Studio. Please welcome Ria. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lupina. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen in Indonesia, Korea, Filipina, India, Italy. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen in Belgium, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and other countries. Welcome to the 6th virtual seminar from MONEV Studio with the theme Evaluation with a Gender Perspective in the Implementation of Minimum Service Standard Policy for Integrated Service for Women and Children Victims of Violence. Reflection from Indonesia and Vision from Global Good Practice. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and Om Swastiastu. First of all, let's thanks to our God for all gift and mercy. In the condition of COVID-19 pandemic, hopefully we are always in a good health and adhere to health protocols. Distinguished Mr. Idewamage Gede Mahendra, Head of the Bali Province Social Service, Honorable Ms. Svetlana Nikustufa, as co-chair of EVOL Gender Plus EVOL Partners. Dear Mr. Pur Hasnain, as co-chair of the Thematic Interest Group on Evaluation and Regularity, Conflict, and Violence Ideas. Honorable Mr. Gunawan Ibrahim Sialagan, as Coordinator of Ombudsman Republic of Indonesia, Ms. Umi Hanif, founder of MONEV Studio and partners. We respect all the ladies and gentlemen of the webinar participants from Bali, Kalimantan, another region, and also special participants from Italy, South Korea, Philippines, Ghana, India, Ivory Coast, and other countries. Thank you for joining 30 people and resource person. Ladies and gentlemen, purpose and objective of the 3 MONEV seminar. First, reflect and share knowledge and insight related to policy evaluation of the implementation of minimum service using gender perspective. Second, build complementary and supportive cooperation in planning and implementing development programs in the region through better monitoring and evaluation practice. Third, contribute to increasing the M&E capacity of development actors with a holistic and collaborative approach. Activity objective. In general, this seminar activity is aimed at increasing the capacity and horizon of monitoring and evaluation, provincial and district or city development stakeholders in Bali, Aceh, Sumatra, Java, Nusa Tenggara, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, Papua Province, and so on. And other participants from various countries such as Italy, South Korea, Philippines, Ghana, India, Ivory Coast, and others. We then begin. Before we start, let's open the seminar today by saying Basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Next, we invite Mr. Dewa Magendra, Head of the Bali Province Social Service, for opening remarks. Time and place, we welcome.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati. Pertama-tama izinkan kami menyampaikan permakluman bahwa sedianya Bapak Kepala Dinas Pemberdayaan Perempuan dan Perlindungan Anak Provinsi Bali hadir pada hari ini karena beliau ada tugas penting sehingga beliau menugaskan saya untuk membacakan sambutan beliau. Mohon izin untuk membacakan sambutan beliau. Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Salam Namo Buddhaya Rahayu. Yang saya hormati para narasumber dan para peserta seminar yang berbahagia. Dalam kesempatan yang baik ini, marilah kita haturkan puji dan syukur kehadapan Ida Sang Yang Widiwasa, Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, karena atas rahmat dan karunia-Nya kita dapat hadir bersama di sini untuk mengikuti kegiatan seminar, monitoring dan evaluasi secara virtual terkait dengan evaluasi perspektif gender dan pelaksanaan standar pelayanan minimal bidang layanan terpadu perempuan dan anak korban kekerasan, refleksi dari Indonesia, dan pembelajaran dari praktek baik global, tentu dalam keadaan sehat, terbebas dari penularan COVID-19 yang masih melanda di negeri kita tercinta ini. Marilah kita senantiasa menjaga kesehatan masing-masing dengan mematuhi protokol kesehatan. Hadirin yang saya hormati, atas nama pribadi dan pemerintah Provinsi Bali, saya mengucapkan terima kasih dan apresiasi yang setinggi-tingginya kepada MONEV Studio Global atas terselenggaranya dan diikutsertakannya kami dalam kegiatan MONEV ini yang sangat bermanfaat untuk meningkatkan wawasan, kesadaran aparatur, dan masyarakat tentang perlindungan perempuan dan anak. Dan tidak kalah pentingnya juga guna memastikan tujuan pembangunan tercapai sesuai rencana, terutama dalam hal mengevaluasi pelaksanaan SPM bidang layanan terpadu perempuan dan anak korban kekerasan. Hadirin yang saya hormati, tindak kekerasan terhadap perempuan dan anak merupakan masalah klasik dan selalu saja terjadi, baik di ranah publik maupun di ranah domestik atau dalam rumah tangga, dan dapat terjadi kapan saja dalam situasi damai ataupun konflik. Tindak kekerasan terhadap perempuan dan anak merupakan tindakan yang melanggar, menghambat, meniadakan, dan mengabaikan hak asasi perempuan dan hak anak. Sehingga tindakan kekerasan terhadap perempuan dan anak telah menjadi permasalahan penting dan menimbulkan kecemasan di setiap negara dan masyarakat. Kasus kekerasan terhadap perempuan dan anak beberapa tahun terakhir yang ditangani oleh Pusat Pelayanan Terpadu Pemberdayaan Perempuan dan Anak P2TP2A atau UPPA di Kabupaten Kota Sebali terjadi peningkatan kasus KDRT tahun 2017, banyaknya kasus 507 kasus, dan tahun 2018 menjadi 571 kasus. Tetapi pada tahun 2019 menurun menjadi 363 kasus. Berdasarkan hasil survei Kompas pada bulan Januari 2021, terjadi peningkatan kasus KDRT selama pandemi COVID-19 ini di Indonesia. Memperhatikan keadaan tersebut, pemerintah Provinsi Bali melalui visi Nangun Satkerti Loke Bali telah menetapkan 22 misi, di mana dalam visi ke-20 Pemprov Bali adalah ingin mewujudkan visi Nangun Satkerti Loke Bali tersebut melalui kehidupan kerama Bali yang demokratis dan berkeadilan dengan memperkuat budaya hukum, budaya politik, dan kesetaraan gender dengan memperhatikan nilai-nilai budaya Bali. Untuk melaksanakan misi tersebut, maka berbagai upaya pemerintah melalui penetapan peraturan atau kebijakan yang telah diperuntukkan dalam upaya penghapusan segala bentuk diskriminasi terhadap perempuan dan anak. Sebagai aplikasi dari kebijakan-kebijakan tersebut, telah dilakukan upaya pencegahan kekerasan terhadap perempuan dan anak, telah dilakukan secara terus-menerus melalui sosialisasi, advokasi, kampanye media yang bekerja sama dengan lembaga masyarakat, pelatihan pencegahan kekerasan dalam rumah tangga, dan memberikan pelayanan terpadu perempuan dan anak. Namun, optimalisasi dari hal tersebut belum dapat terlaksana karena keterbatasan sarana prasarana, SDM penyedia layanan, dan kurangnya kepekaan gender pada masyarakat serta adanya faktor budaya masyarakat, yaitu pola pikir konvensional yang masih kuat dengan budaya patriarkinya. Melalui seminar MONEV ini diharapkan dapat memaksimalkan pelaksanaan SPM berbasis gender untuk menjawab permasalahan yang ada. Hadirin yang saya hormati, demikian beberapa hal yang dapat kami sampaikan. Selamat mengikuti seminar MONEV pada hari ini. Semoga Tuhan Yang Maha Esa senantiasa memberikan bimbingan, tuntunan, dan perlindungan kepada kita semua. Sekian dan terima kasih. Om Santi 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 Om. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kepala Dinas Sosial Pemberdayaan Perempuan dan Perlindungan Anak Provinsi Bali, Idewa Gede Mahendra Putra. Terima kasih.
Thank you for the opening remarks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we go to the main event, we invite Ms. Likina Devayanti, as Head of Business Development MONEV Studio, for launching MONEV 4.0 application. Time and place be welcome.
Thank you, Ria. Ladies and gentlemen, as MONEV Studio exists to be a pioneer startup in promoting sustainable development, M&E literation, and inclusiveness, we are proudly launching our MONEV 4.0 mobile application. We are here to help you to make your experience in research, monitoring, and evaluation activities to be more connected, inclusive, interesting, and also holistic. MONEV 4.0 is the first mobile platform in M&E to help you understand and learn how the development and evaluation works. And also, it increases your capacity to become a good and professional researcher easily. MONEV 4.0 is a complete package solution in one application. In MONEV 4.0, you will easily connect with other literacy channels that best suit your character, from pocket books, video learning, podcasts, MONEVpedia, newsletters, and to personal chats with MONEV Studio experts. Now, MONEV 4.0 is officially released in Google Play Store. You can download through Google Play Store by simply type MONEV 4.0 in the search field and go download and install the application on your mobile phone. Let me introduce you to lots of interesting, creative, and unique features in our mobile MONEV 4.0 application. First, you can try MONEVpedia, an online encyclopedia about development, monitoring, evaluation, and research provided in Bahasa Indonesia. It will not make you confused about M&E terms anymore. And the second one is Buku Saku MONEV. This is our literacy product in the form of narratives and visual graphs as a guide to understand and conduct a step-by-step monitoring and evaluation. It will downloadable in PDF format through our MONEV 4.0 mobile apps. We also have MONEV Podcast for people who better learn through verbal format. This is the best way to listen on our podcast. The podcast platform is provided to discuss the latest update on M&E concept and practices in a casual setting and with hot topics. This podcast is also available in Spotify. We have also MONEV Learning for people who love learning something through visual media. We also have MONEV Learning that presents concepts and knowledge about MONEV through YouTube video. You can access this all content also through our YouTube content, our YouTube channel, sorry. You can type MONEV Studio or going through MONEV 4.0 mobile application. The other feature that we create is MONEV News Indonesia. This is our bulletin that is published quarterly. MONEV News Indonesia highlights recent information, issues, activities that relate to development evaluation. So readers will also be provided with reviews of M&E profiles or figures who play an important role in M&E development. The last but the most important thing in our MONEV 4.0 mobile application, users can access MONEV Chat. MONEV Chat is like a direct conversation online or chat for question answers and also discussion about development and how to monitor and evaluate the program through a platform that is connected to the MONEV Studio team. And also it is connecting with the other MONEV 4.0 users. So who says that learning MONEV is difficult? Get free download MONEV 4.0 mobile application now, get it on the Google Play Store and simply type MONEV 4.0 your Google Play Store, download it and install on your mobile phone. Okay, maybe that's all for me. Now we are going to Umi Hani as the moderator to lead our event today. Thank you and please welcome Bu Umi.
Ya, thank you Ligwina. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bapak and Ibu, I would like to turn off my video because my internet connection is a bit unstable. Apologies for this. So Bapak Ibu, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera bagi kita semuanya.
Ya, MONEV itu Pak, yang Bu kita MONEV Studio itu Bu.
Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Good morning and greetings to distinguished participants of the 6th MONEV Safari. Bapak and Ibu, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 6th MONEV Safari session. I'm Umi, is pleased to be here with you to facilitate South-South learning in advancing evaluation with a very relevant topic and great speaker to our Safari today. Bapak and Ibu, this topic is really relevant with our everyday life. As we may know, or some of us, the implementation of the Ministry Regulation of Women Empowerment number 1, 2010, concerning the minimum service standard policy on the integrated services for women and children victims of violence, which include a system for recording and reporting data on violence, leaves problems. Because the low service coverage for victims of domestic violence. So we need to reflect on this, even though effort is made to strengthen the MSS implementation through monitoring and evaluation and also complaint services. Even nowadays, Bapak and Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, domestic violence increased drastically during the pandemic. The results from a recent survey in January informed that violence against women was skyrocketing, but only less than 10% of women from the survey who were victims of violence reported the case. So we are really concerned on this because most of them prefer to remain silent or limited sharing with their relative, friends, or neighbors. So, but interestingly, respondents who did not report their cases were mainly from higher education background. So, how evaluation can relate here? Because we believe in the principle of no one left behind to boost an inclusive minimum service standard policy. So that's why I think, and we believe that we need to discuss this. And for this reason, the monitoring and evaluation seminar in the 6th Safari by MONEV Studio in collaboration with the government of Bali province is keen to discuss the burning topic, evaluation with a gender perspective in the implementation of minimum service standard in the integrated services sector for women and children victims of violence. This is as part of our reflection from Indonesia, from Bali, and also lesson from global good practices. So we have our good global fellow here, Mrs. Svetlana, and also Mr. Hurhasnain is here and keen to share their global perspectives. Now let me introduce to our great and global speakers. So the first speaker here, we have Mrs. Svetlana Negrosuva. So she is my fellow, the co-chair of the EVOL Gender. She's also an M&E expert, including learning and gender expertise with almost 20 years of experience with multi-stakeholder processes across donors and also development implementers, including African Development Bank, the World Bank, USAID, and other major donors. She has incorporated gender and also equity focus underlined by the feminist principle into the evaluations. She is very highly exposed with a topic on food security, climate change, environment, and health. In addition to her role in EVOL Gender, which is a part of the EVOL Network, EVOL Partners Network, she is also the chair of the Feminist Evaluation Thematic Interest Group under the American Evaluation Association. So this is a great network based in the United States. She has been really passionate about increasing the opportunity to learn and provide capacity building about the role of MNE and also to advance gender equality and equity agenda in everyday professional life. So she will introduce us with various evaluation approaches from a gender perspective and to understand the benefits. And then the second speaker, we will have Mr. Hur Hasnain, the charming Hur. So please turn on your video. Sorry, Svetlana and also Hur. We are keen to see your video. And maybe raise your hand, okay? Svetlana, it's really early in Rome. I believe you are in Rome now, in Italy.
Hi. Yes.
Okay, great to see you. Yeah, and also we have Mr. Hur Hasnain. You look very fresh today. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks to me.
Good morning.
Yeah,
Hur
is based in London. So it's a bit freezing today or warm. All right. So Hur is an evaluation specialist. He is currently works for the European Commissions. Yeah, with the European Commissions based in Brussels, Belgium. He is also the founder of the Pakistan Evaluation Association and board member of the International Development Evaluation Association, or IDEAS. So IDEAS is hosted 2 yearly or biennially conference. So who may know that in the near future, we will have the IDEAS conference in Bali. As we all know that Bali is, is a good place for hosting an international conference. So I think we are open to that option, right? Okay.
Indeed, and
yeah.
I think there are talks about Bali.
Yes.
And, very happy if it happens.
Yeah, a bit teaser about Bali. Maybe we need to watch Eat, Pray, and Love. So that movie is really promoting Bali in a very good perspective. Okay, so back to Hur's profile. Bapak and Ibu, please mute your mic a bit. Okay. Hur has an extensive experience working in various thematic and including the gender equality, climate change, renewable energy, and more importantly, he is an expert in fragility, violence, and conflict. So he is also conducting several research and evaluation for projects funded by major donors like UN agencies, European commissions, UK agency, and many others. So he is also have some art skill. So he wrote a poetry, and maybe at the end of the session, maybe he can share some of his poet. Okay. So we will have his experience about the importance of having evaluation in fighting domestic violence in a normal days and also during the pandemic time. So we believe that lessons from various countries that he's been exposing, including Pakistan, Lebanon, and many other countries in Africa and other developing countries is important to be shared here and discussed with all of us. And then, thank you, Hur. And then we have Pak Gunawan. Pak Gunawan, please turn on your video and say hi to everybody here.
Hi everyone. Halo Bapak Ibu sekalian.
Yeah. So Pak Gunawan will share an insight from Indonesia's policy perspective. He is the expert speaker here. And he has been working for quite long under the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is extensively worked with the local government from 2008 to 2019. And now, because of his extensive skill in monitoring and evaluation, he is coordinated coordinating the group of cooperation under the Ombudsman of the Republic of Indonesia. So this is a boost to his M&E portfolio after handling several programs related to evaluation of rural development, community empowerment, poverty reduction, and many others. So he will share some insight about what is actually happening with the MSS policy in Indonesia in the context of gender perspective, but also reflect to our from the sharing of from our global speakers, the first speaker Svetlana, and also from the second speaker Hur Hasnain. So this is a really good opportunity for all of us here. So Bapak and Ibu, without further ado, I think we will turn the time over to the first speaker, Svetlana Negrosuva. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. Bapak Ibu, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and then I will bring them up after the presentations, and we will have time for discussion at the end. Thank you. Svetlana, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Umi. Good evening, I guess afternoon for majority of you on the call. I am very privileged to be with you today, and I'm very excited to see the interest in this and the excellent organization of the event. So Humi did an introduction to me, and she forgot to mention that she was a member of EVOL Gender Management Group, which is how we got to know each other, and Hur is still managed in the EVOL Gender Management Group. So we're very happy to be collaborating on different activities, including this one. As requested by, okay, you will be changing, right, the slides. We want to proceed to the next slide. I will give a brief introduction and it's a little bit higher up to the gender equality and equity in evaluation, and talk about gender and feminist approaches and highlight some good practices in the field. And on the left, you will see the red line that crosses the checkbox. And this is something that hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will understand that does not need to be done. Gender is not a checkbox, but it is a way of thinking. And attention to that topic is really important, especially for the topic of this presentation. Next one. Just to remind you again, the EVOL Gender Plus is the platform that Umi just put in the comment. It's a global network of like-minded individuals and VOPI representatives of voluntary organizations for professionalization in evaluation. And our mission since 2015 has been to work through VOPIs, individuals, and at the global level to promote equity focus and gender responsiveness in evaluations, including for SDGs, for evaluations of SDGs. Thank you. Next. Just some key concepts to get us started: gender equality versus gender equity. And those get used interchangeably. And hopefully after this slide, there won't be any confusion. So gender equality entails the concept that all human beings, both men and women, can choose their own abilities and make choices that are not guided by what they were born, gender roles and prejudices. Therefore, their needs of women and men, their rights and responsibilities will not depend on their sex. Whereas gender equity is in the context of development, implies to measures that compensate for disadvantages that have been brought to bear due to historical and social disadvantages and constraints. And applies, of course, also broader to than men and women, and usually applies to vulnerable populations. Thank you. Next. So the key dimensions of gender equality, which is number 5, you can see on the slide, is the SDG goal, are related to access to resources, services, and decision-making. And if you click another time, there is something else has to come up. The equality before and under the law, equality of opportunity of economic and political and social fields, and equality in dignity. Those are the 2 groups of which one offers here when they hear about gender equality. And what is important is to know that Beijing Platform of Action, which happened and signed in 1995, has been serving as a blueprint for achieving gender equality and women's empowerment. And then it was highlighted in the Millennium Development Goals in 2000 and taken forward with the 2030 Agenda SDGs, the Gender Equality 5. However, as the analysis shows, along the dimensions that you will see on your left, much progress has not been done, and it's not uniform progress by countries or continents. And so this is where the role of monitoring this progress and evaluating it and successes and challenges comes really important. Thank you. Next slide. This slide also shows you the connectedness between between the Beijing Platform of Action, the critical areas of concern for women globally, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the SDG goal number 5, and the targets under each, which are many, and all of them go back to the Beijing Platform of Action. A lot of them are numeric, and also on the right column, you will see that there are specific targets under different SDGs beyond SDG 5 that relate to women and gender equality and empowerment. And this clearly underscores the importance of gender equality and equity as the interconnected and cross-sectional priority in the international agenda. Thank you. So the gender responsive evaluations, which we're here to discuss and get familiar with, basically in this context of the SDGs and national governments, builds understanding for SDG progress. It helps evaluating progress towards goal 5 and other goals, evaluating how all SDGs contribute to gender equality outcomes in different sectors and priority areas, and evaluating the overall contribution of the SDG policy framework and the country level. And the country level being the priority level for monitoring SDGs, but also, of course, implementation of related interventions. Thank you. So the gender responsive evaluation is a systematic and impartial assessment that provides credible and reliable evidence-based information about the extent to which an intervention at any level has resulted in a progress or the lack of towards intended or unintended results regarding gender equality and women's empowerment. In gender responsive evaluation, there are 2 key components that need to be considered by evaluants and by those who conduct evaluations and those who analyze the results. So there are results of what is looked at, so assessing the degree to which gender and power relationships have been addressed and to which extent there are changes in the interventions, but also process, how evaluations are conducted, and the process of conducting evaluations and monitoring evaluation activities that is participatory and respectful of all stakeholders involved, including those at women's voices and different marginalized groups. Thank you. Next. So the interventions that aim to address the gender equality tend to be complex. And we saw already the interconnectedness and interlinkages within goal 5, but also with others. They are concerned with changes at the policy level, institutions, communities, and individual levels. It is not only about delivering the services, but changing hearts and minds and appreciation of the complexity. The evaluators have to draw on a variety of approaches and methods that are presented on the slide, from system thinking to feminist theory and research, to impact and participatory evaluation. So mixed methods are encouraged and have been practiced primarily in the application of gender lens in evaluating complex programs that touch on the issues of gender equality and women's empowerment. Thank you. With that, it's really important to also understand that there are differences in gender approaches and feminist approaches. And the feminist approaches come to bear from the feminist theory, which is a long-standing theory, but the key differences are presented on the slide, and those are important to understand when one approaches or comprehends the results of the evaluation. So the differences are in looking at differences between women and men versus exploring why those differences exist, looking as men and women for gender approaches, and looking at gender identities are not just linked to male and women, and also recognizing that there are other vulnerable populations that feminist approaches allow to do. And acknowledging the differences between, again, women and men, but also neither of those groups is a homogeneous group. So going further, I'm trying to go fast, just to, you will be provided with the slides, so you will have a chance to read. So Umi, you can proceed.
Next.
Yeah. So gender assessment, and I'm sure you have heard about it, is usually one of the, the core to start gender responsive evaluations or feminist evaluations, all those types of evaluations that do highlight the inequalities and issues of lacking equity. So the gender assessment and analysis usually entails the analysis of any relevant data, be it qualitative or quantitative, about the distributional impacts of operations of men and women and the constraints that they're faced with at the level of the intervention, which can be thematic or national. And gender with an intersectional perspective looks at broader social inclusion aspects as age, race, and income level. And the assessments, the needs assessments around in the gender analysis should focus on the increasing, a potential of increasing or decreasing the gender gap. So I made a screenshot of the Indonesia's gender analysis conducted by Asian Development Bank, which maybe some of you have seen, but it looks like it's an interesting document to comprehend the context. Thank you. You can proceed. So the principles of gender responsive evaluations are many, and the core are, again, that the not focusing on women, but examining the differential impacts of the interventions on women and men. And those sex differences cannot just be explored by themselves, but should be looked at in the interaction with other variables, such as age, class, education, location, ethnicity, religion. And sound GRE uses participatory and consultative approach and mixed methods, as we discussed already. Usually what it is noted is that there is a strong focus on women, and it's not for no reason. Women constitute and experience economic, political, social, and cultural disadvantages in most societies, and those are structural, and there's a long history of them. And getting to the monitoring and evaluation side, a lot of data that drives programming are not sex segregated, and important gender-specific information, such as use and access to productive resources along the dimensions that I presented earlier, that such information is not available, and especially related to gender-based violence. So this is where it becomes a stronger focus on women. Thank you. In practice, gender-responsive evaluation requires customization of tools that are used in practice. And they need to go beyond aggregation indicators and differences in average to ensure that leaving no one behind approach highlighted by the Sustainable Development Goals is adhered to. In that way, defining the boundaries of evaluation is very important, and only the direct and primary gender objectives defined in the project or intervention design need to be considered. The secondary outcomes on the target population can also need to be considered because they might have not been originally accounted for in the design of an intervention. And tertiary outcomes, the unintended outcomes, good or bad, should also be looked at. There are 3 levels of depth and intensity of a GRE type evaluation. Diagnostic of the current situation, which is the gender analysis and assessment, pre-test and post-test comparison, and analysis of the causal linkages. And this is, of course, the best case scenario if there is money and resources and including capacities of the evaluators and experts involved. And this applies, of course, cross-sectorially. Yeah, you can proceed. So as I mentioned before, feminist evaluation is one of the approaches that constitutes gender responsive evaluation. And it constitutes 6 themes and principles under this, most of which are closely looked to evaluations that are practiced outside of gender responsive or feminist evaluation. And everybody is very familiar with, such as the qualitative research, the utilization focused evaluation, and outcome mapping. Feminist evaluation is rarely used by itself, but it brings the lens that are required and necessary to highlight the vulnerabilities of the targeted populations of the intervention and bringing them out to ensure advocacy aspect. You can proceed. So I will just include a couple of slides here, and some of them are included in the annexes of the slides. So for example, ways of thinking is one of the feminist evaluation principles. And there are a few assumptions that go into this, that evaluators are not experts and everybody brings their biases and everybody should be aware of them. And realities of the world, they do differ when evaluations are conducted, when recommendations are developed, and consequently when they are implemented. The facilitation skills are very important in implementation of that principle, and of course the time that it takes. At the same, there are ways to handle some of the challenges with implementation that are presented on the right, such as including local expertise, which is very important in this discussion today, and being aware of the diversity and pros and cons of different methodologies that are used. Thank you. For the next one is the voices of most disadvantaged populations and empowerment of those as one of the core principles. And again, most disadvantaged are usually women, but there are others. And assumptions that go into implementation of this principle is at the human rights at the core of the feminist evaluation, and that the non-discrimination of different population from different stratas of the society is important. Thank you, Umi. Proceed. So some advice for using feminist evaluation. Again, you will see it on the slides. You don't need to be a feminist evaluator to use it, but it is important to apply the principles. Thank you. Proceed. This is an example of how to match feminist evaluation with the principle-focused evaluation, which has been widely used recently and spearheaded by Michael Quinn Patton. And it just provides the framing of how to bring one's principles or organizational principles into application of the feminist evaluation in reality, in principle, in practice. So then we proceed to the examples. Thank you, Umi. Some more examples of the effectiveness scales, of quadrants of change, and contributional analysis that can be used for gender responsive evaluations and the methods and tools. And again, this will be available in the slides and is available in the publication that I will put a note about at the end. Thank you. And here are just a couple of examples of use of the gender responsive evaluation in practice. They come from my previous work at the African Development Bank, where we use gender integration and analysis in the evaluation of the country strategy paper. And this was Cape Verde, which is a small island in West Africa. So it was important to bring out the country and sector gender gap analysis. For example, it was in the energy sector or Cape Verde or West Africa at large. It was important to consider gender equality and social inclusion considerations at the design of the country strategy paper, and importance of considering how the country strategy paper applied to the gender strategy of the African Development Bank, and of course the relevance to the other sectorial strategies. So this is just to show the linkages and entry points for evaluation and bringing out the gender aspect. And of course, the last one is about monitoring, to which extent indicators were sex disaggregated and what they later allowed to tell. Thank you. The next one is a similar example from the same evaluation, but it was at the level of the intervention and at the project level. Again, bringing out dimensions at the start of the project at the design and using all the data that is available to highlight those opportunities that would have allowed to measure if something changed.
Sekarang yang penting adalah 5-6 dulu kita putus.
Sorry, I think.
Sorry, please continue, Svetlana.
Yeah, sorry. And so this is just assessing the results in relation to design and missed opportunities of integrating gender. This would be the lens that that an experienced professional would bring. And the next one example is specifically related to the topic of this actually discussion. You can proceed, Umi. Is around integrated safeguard systems, which are practiced in development banks, and not just African Development Bank. I know that Asian Development Bank, for example, also has a strong system around that. This is just the background slide, but you can take us to the next slide, where I will show more in terms of the evaluation aspects. So the environmental and social impact assessments are at the core of application of the safeguard systems, again, beyond AFDB as well. And they look at gender and vulnerability, basically aspects, and to make sure that when the projects are designed and implemented, those vulnerable populations are considered and potential impacts on them are touched on. And environmental and social impact assessments, I would say parallel maybe to gender assessments. And they are a good entry point into the projects that deal often with infrastructure and aspects that are not considered soft usually. And the highlighted is requirements of how they're conducted is the consultations, the participatory engagement with all the stakeholders, including vulnerable populations, and assessing what the risks are of implementing a project. And of course, gender assessments are conducted kind of under the environmental social impacts on a very specific project level and at a very specific, usually geographic location to see what might happen at the end of the project. And for example, into specific interviews with female-headed household, widows, orphans, handicapped people, which applies to infrastructure projects. And I think we're moving close to the end. So moving forward, also, again, this is a very complex graph, but basically you will see that on almost box, there is a word gender. So even in implementation of the infrastructure type project, when ISAs are conducted, there are different entry points of gender screening, the development of the briefs around the assessments, the consultations, gender inclusive consultations, and of course, development of the gender action plan. Should the assessment find that the risks to vulnerable populations is high. So the last example we can skip, the next slide we can skip, but it's just another example of the intervention and how to approach this. And this is just to, again, to highlight what EVOL Gender Plus does and what we can do together with the professionals like Umi and others. And the last slide shows basically a screenshot of the publication that is recently released by UN Women, who is a co-chair of the EVOL Gender Plus on the good practices in gender responsive evaluations. And it's a very easy to read and digestible material for M&E and other professionals who are interested in those topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana, for a very great presentation. I hope everyone is enjoying the slides. It's very colorful and contextually relevant to our situation now. So, Bapak and Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, we will go ahead with the next presenter. But if you have questions, please write them down in the chat box. I will take them later after all presentation is done. And for those who just join us, welcome. But now we can come to the next speaker, the charming Hur Hasnain. Hur, you have around 20 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Umi. And I must say that it is very hard to follow any presentation after Svetlana. I mean, she is a great expert on evaluation, gender-based and feminist evaluation, and a lovely friend as well. And it's also good that after her presentation, I'm here with mainly two examples that I have done. One is in Pakistan, and you see one of the photos from the project here, and the other one is in Lebanon. Both of the example of the countries are majority Muslim countries, still in the Asian region. So we hope that will be relevant to the Indonesian context. So, I mean, let me start with saying thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at this sixth MONEV Safari hosted by the Regional Development Planning Office of Bali. So as I mentioned earlier, so today I'll be talking about evaluations of interventions targeting all kinds of violence, especially against women during or without the pandemic situation. So I have, to make things simple, I have outlined 7 key principles to evaluate such interventions. And as I said earlier, so I have 2 examples that we hope that you find helpful. Next slide, please. Okay, so, you know, so we are living in a pandemic situation. Things are not normal. You know, we're all working, majority of us are working remotely from our houses. And the way we do meetings or any other kind of things are all different. So it has certainly affected the field of evaluation as well. The way we do evaluations are different as well. So I'll give two examples, but in pandemic situation, they might differ. You may need to use new tools or adapt the present evaluation approaches to fit to the context. So today we'll talk about domestic violence and the intimate partner violence kind of interventions. So I know, I'm sure that you know that domestic violence is a broader kind of violence that covers violence within a household, which could be from parents, from siblings, from partner, etc. While intimate partner violence is around from between married couple or between partners living together, kind of things. So both can take various forms. It could be physical, emotional, sexual, or psychological, and people of all races, culture, gender, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic class experience these. But there are some, such as women, such as people, communities of color in some of the Western countries, and the marginalized groups are seen to be more affected. And studies show that the current pandemic situation has either drastically increased or decreased the number of domestic violence cases being reported. And this data is coming from Canada and the UK especially. And then, you can understand the increased number of violence cases, but then decreased or having no such cases reported is a big issue. This could be because the survivors of violence live with, especially the women that live in developing countries, have no or limited places to go and seek refuge. To minimize risk, women's shelters have been unable to accommodate new people, and women who have children may not want to, if they get the opportunity to go and take shelter in these areas because, COVID-19 is there, so there are health risks. Similarly, because we're talking about developing countries, there are a lot of economic migrants that have been traveling here and there who have to come back to their base countries. So I was reading only in Bangladesh, there were because of COVID, there were about 500,000 people who had to come back, and in most of the cases with no money. So in such cases, the pandemic is impacting on this gender based violence, domestic violence, etc. So moving to the next slide. Yes. So what I'll do today, I'll give you, I have actually taken out 7 key principles from the 2 examples that I'm going to share with you. Number 1 being understand the context. We were just explaining the context earlier. Number 2 is safety comes first. 3 is about gender analysis, then choosing appropriate methods, and then making sure that you seek feedback and engage the communities using information and communication technologies, and then validating the results. So from this onwards, the slide will change rapidly. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So this is a good example of the context. So if you want to address problem like this, you really need to understand the context and how change actually happens within a context. Things happen completely differently in different contexts. For example, as you can see, this photo, there is a cow in the middle of the road, and this is India. So the cows here know that if they go in the middle of the road, no car will hit them. They would rather stop and let the cow pass. But then if you come to the European countries, the things are different. And the drivers are instructed not to stop the vehicles. so that you don't disturb the vehicles behind you. So, I mean, you know, you will see that there are, I mean, the animals that might dare to come in between the road, they might not survive very long. But then at the same time, the accident rates are much lower in Europe, European countries. And then the next slide. Okay, so again, to understand the context, this is a very interesting framework that was developed by a guy called David Snowden, who used to work for the IBM, which is a computer company mainly in the late 90s. So you can see that there, David has provided 4 different types of context. One is the known context, that is where you know the relationship between causes and effect. For example, you have a headache, you know, in like most of the cases you give paracetamol to somebody and then the headache is cured. For example, I mean, it's still establishing, like, for example, the COVID-19 vaccination cases. And I mean, we know by now that more than 90% it prevents from COVID-19. More than, it's effective more than 90% kind of thing. I mean, results vary for different vaccinations. Then there are the knowable contexts. This is, for example, in complicated situations. For example, you have to build a hospital or a house, you have a blueprint and you start from there. And there comes the complex situation where, you know, the relationship between causes and effect are not very linear. A doesn't always lead you to B. And this is the kind of, you know, the evaluations we are talking about today. And then there are chaotic situations. I mean, which, I mean, you know, the results go anywhere. You do something and you get something else. And every time you're doing things, you have to change the way you do it based on the context, based on the security situation, in pandemic, the health, and etc. So next slide. Great. So again, when we're talking about such kind of things, I mean, it is important to understand the scale of effort. I mean, there are like very community level, there are multiple communities, provincial level, at the national level, and then also at regional level, the understanding of, like, you know, gender norms and behaviors, or, I mean, more broadly, what change actually looks like can be different. So to explain what the change is very important. So next slide. Again, I mean, this is it's an important point. So as you can see from the Millennium Development Goals, we see that countries that were affected by fragility and conflict, only 16% of them could show some results on their indicators, development indicators, including, I mean, the current SDG goal number 5, which is about gender equality. So besides evaluation, I'm very happy that MONEV Studio can bring the Bali Regional Development Planning Office here, so we can have this conversation today. So I mean, there's a World Bank report behind it, and I've sourced it. So the main reason of not achieving those targets was that the countries did not have a proper monitoring and evaluation system in place. So I just wanted to show you this slide to share this learning. So let's move forward. The next slide is about and the causes and effect, as I was explaining earlier. So in a simple intervention or a simple context, I mean, things are a bit linear. You give a paracetamol to somebody with a headache, and then they recover from this, and then they will be able to perform their duties better and kind of things. While on the right hand side, you see the complex intervention. So things are not linear. So you plan something happens, you have to cancel it, and etc. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so this is a Pakistan case study. So it's from an evaluation we did in Pakistan. And so Pakistan, I mean, it's also South Asian country, not very far, Muslim majority country. And Umi and I was actually one day in China, Umi. We were comparing the the different socio-economic indicators of achievement of the two countries, Indonesia and Pakistan. And we saw that there are quite a lot of similarities in there. I mean, but it won't be like the same, but like similarities. So this was an intervention of a UK aid-funded project on gender equality and women's economic empowerment in the southern province called Sindh. It's very rural areas such as Umarkot, etc. So it was done in a community which was mainly Hindu in a Muslim majority country, and 80% of them were rural. Like there were challenges around like mobility issues. Women would not go out, and they would not engage in economic activities, etc. So majority of the participants of that intervention were living in rural areas, where they were the tenants, how do you call it, the tenant or subsistence farmers. So there is a feudal lord who owns the land, and there are people who work on those lands, and they live in their houses or on like those feudal lords' lands because they work for them. So they're very, very, very dependent. So moving forward in the next slide, we'll talk about power analysis and etc. But thank you for changing the slide. So the next slide is about a case study, again another evaluation from Lebanon. And this was also very interesting evaluation. The intervention was about to contribute to equitable access to formal and informal justice for poor women. In Lebanon, it was in different Middle Eastern countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Yemen, and Egypt. But then we chose Lebanon for our evaluation. The theory of change there was that if you economically empower vulnerable women, they would be able to stand up to their right against an abusive relationship and seek judicial institutions help to claim their right if they are violated. So let's move to so these are the two examples that we will share throughout this presentation. So keep them in mind. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so we understood the context. Let's start with the context analysis. And the next thing that is very important, especially in this pandemic situation, is to think about safety and security of everybody that gets involved, and that not only mean the women or children or elderly people that you would engage in evaluation, but this also involves people that are conducting evaluations. For example, your evaluators, the enumerators, the data collectors, the drivers, and etc. So one principle to keep in mind here is that the security of staff members, partner, and beneficiaries supersedes any kind of accountability measure that could be evaluation. So safety comes first. So what did we do in both of the evaluations that we're discussing here? In Pakistan case, as I mentioned to you earlier, the population, especially the women, were very much dependent on the feudal lord. So there is like one master that owns the land, and people are very much dependent on them. And I remember I was interviewing a father, and he was giving me his case study. He was like, talking to me. And then during the case study, he mentioned to me that as soon as his daughter turned 13, he took her out of the school and got her married to somebody he knew. And I stopped my interview there. I said, oh, excuse me, just 1 second. Why did you do that at the age of 13? And the guy looked at me, and I still can't, forget that gaze. And he told me that, what can you do? I mean, because there are so many cases of young girls being raped while going to school. I mean, they get exposed to the community, and because there are like these power structures established there, they can't stand up to, for example, the feudal lord. I mean, these feudal lords are the ones who are in politics, who sit in the parliament, who make the decisions, the administration, like, for example, the police and etc. They're all, okay. And they're all like almost in most of the cases with them. So it's very hard. So what they do is they take their daughters, especially out of the school, get them married for social protection, for their like protection, basically. So it's like kind of a protection mechanism. So it's important to understand the context, and the second thing is to understand like whether evaluation be safe to such kind of vulnerable population. Again, in the same Pakistan case, I remember that the men in the community, because this intervention was specifically targeting the women, the men in the community had issues, because even the community centers that were established there were mainly for men, so women would not go there. So this project had kind of a contribution in that regard as well. So about in 5 months, the men started allowing their women to take part in the community centers, etc. The second example of Lebanon, it was a very sensitive issue. I mean, of course, the women were, reported to experience some intimate partner violence or broadly domestic violence cases. So it was very important that the implementing partners who were implementing the intervention were not seen to be intervening into, personal matters. So, these are the things you have to be very careful about. And then especially when you go for an evaluation, you ask a lot of questions. Make sure that, we don't put anybody's life in danger. And the next slide, I know it's always very hard to put everything in a short time frame. So next thing is, when evaluating, etc., as Svetlana mentioned earlier, gender analysis is very important, especially in such kind of evaluation, looking at the power structures, looking at the monitoring data about the trends in different perceptions, how things are being perceived, and different triggers that could escalate some kind of violence or problems. So like asking yourself some questions like, what are the monitoring data available? Has there been any adaptation to the intervention according to the changing context? And then, also based on your gender analysis that you have, and sometimes evaluators don't have it. So that is a situation when I think they should do a kind of a brief analysis with the experts, or go to some agencies that might have such kind of analysis, some organizations, and then some civil society organization who are very grassrooted can have like a very good gender analysis. So see if that could be shared with you, so that if you're making a monitoring and evaluation plan, or you're making your evaluation framework, you're designing evaluation questions, or you are sending, for example, men to gather data from women. And in some cases, is, even this little minor detail is not considered or it's not possible. I remember I was doing an evaluation in South Sudan, and I mean, there were, some ethnic rivalries, and we could not find a women data gatherer who was literate enough to go and gather data on these sensitive issues. So these are some kind of the challenges. So look at the gender analysis that is available, or if not available, see how you can get them, and then make sure that your M&E plans or your evaluation framework is around that. And let's move to the next slide. I mean, it's very important step. Again, Svetlana mentioned, again, evaluation methods around it here as well. So, I mean, if you go to the next slide, next slide. Okay, good. There are different evaluation methods that have been used in such kind of evaluations, of interventions or contexts where the relationship between causes and effects were not clear. As I was mentioning earlier, the complex situation or the chaotic context as per the Sinefin framework. There are different ways of doing evaluation. It's not that situation is difficult and we can't do evaluation. There are always ways you can do things differently. I remember there were challenges when I was working in some of
ada burung elang atau burung apa itu dililit sama ular. Ada.
Sorry for that. Please continue.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I remember, there were conversation in sub-Saharan Africa in some very conflict-affected context about how to talk to the survivors of sexual violence. I mean, how could you sit and talk to somebody who's just coming out of a very how to frame it, intense violence that they have faced. For example, I mean, this happens everywhere, the sexual violence and etc. So, I mean, there are different ways you do it. So, I mean, if you can't talk to them to any reason, for permission, for security, etc., you can always find somebody who can talk about them. Or, I mean, the data might not be as reliable, but then you can still get some sense of the data. So you can talk to the neighbor, friends, and etc. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. I know I'm aware of the time. I have my timer here, but I'll be quick. About to end the presentation. So in the Pakistan case, so what we did in Pakistan case, we used outcome harvesting. Most significant change, and this software or method, we can call it Sprockler, which is story-based. So we gathered a lot of stories from the women about the change that is happening in the context because of the intervention. So, if you look at this page, which is a screenshot, so this Sprockler, what it does is it gathers stories on a mobile phone or a tablet, and then, I mean, you produce a normal report, but then also it gives an online platform as well. So you will see on the top, there is the yellow highlighted web address, which is the report where you can see all the analysis of all the questions that we had in this Pakistani context. But then one thing that is very interesting here is the chart on the right hand side. You will see the question is, how easily did other people around you accept the change in your story? So basically, this Sprockler thing is all about story. So we gathered from a woman, like, what was her story of change. So as you can see in this graph, the green, so every single dot that you see is one individual, and they have their own stories. So when you click on those dots, their stories appear on the very left hand pane, which says stories. So all the stories go there. So here you see that So men who represent green dots, all of them are on the, like majority of them are on the left side, which means they faced a lot of resistance to their change. And the women who are like the blue dots, they are towards the right, which means they were fine. I mean, they didn't face very big resistance to change. And this was interesting. So we went back to the community. We said, hey, I mean, data says that women are saying that, you know, change is fine with them, but then men faced a lot of resistance, although the project was for women. It was about gender equality. It was women's economic empowerment. And then we understood this, you know, the power dynamics. So the power dynamics, so as you know, it was a very rural community in very rural areas of Pakistan. So women were very much dependent on men. I mean, like men taking all the decisions within the households. So when the project worked with the men, after, like, as I said, 5-6 months, I mean, there were men groups who were engaged in, you know, accepting that women can come into business or start doing some job. They can go to the nearby city and gather some raw materials for the products they would make. In this case, like stitching, they were doing an embroidery work. So in this part of Pakistan, and also, I mean, it borders with India, you know, their embroidery and their tanka, they're like stitch. I mean, this embroidery work, that's very famous. So we talked to the men. So the women were fine as the men were engaged, but then men faced a lot of problem because they were, you know, the neighboring villages, their friends or their relatives in the neighboring villages where the intervention was not done, where the men were not engaged, they started kind of bullying them. I mean, like, okay, talking things like, okay, so women are not in your control now, your women go out of the houses, they even go out of the village, kind of things. So this is what the men told us. So this is something, I mean, very interesting. I mean, we didn't kind of think about it, but then we went back to the community, we learned about it, and we realized, I mean, it's very important to work with the men as well. If you have like a project that's specifically targeting to gender equality or like women's empowerment. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so this one, this is also very interesting. So this is a chart that comes out of so it's an approach, or it's a tool that's developed by, like, you know, a great thinker in evaluation called Rick Davies. He's an Australian living in the UK. So he created this a tool in Excel called EVOL C3, which is based on the philosophies generated from the qualitative comparative analysis, QCA, and predictive analytics. The predictive analytics actually comes from, you know, the stock exchange market, in which you predict the outcomes. Okay, this will happen if these attributes are made. So talking about the evaluation approaches, I mean, what we did in this Lebanon case is we engaged the social workers to get the stories again from the women who were suffering from this, you know, intense partner violence. And who were, you know, being abused. So what we did was we identified 22 different attributes of those women, whether those women were educated or not, whether they were doing business or not, whether they had children or not, kind of things. And then we ran this query on, you know, the eval C3 predictive analytics. So we mainly wanted to look at, like, what are the characteristics of a woman who's within, you know, experiencing some, you know, kind of abusive relationship, to leave a relationship. So this is a model that we got with 95% accuracy, sufficient but not necessary. That it is not necessary that, you know, these three attributes are present in a woman and they leave their partner. It's very interesting. I mean, I mean, you know, we do evaluations of these kinds for like women's representation in parliament or very tangible outcome, but this was a very complex intervention. So having these kind of attributes leading to an outcome was a bit interesting. I know it's a bit complicated for here, but I just wanted to show you that there are different ways that you can do evaluations and get results. So in this case, if women was, you know, 95% of the cases when women were litigant, they had concerns about their husband's character, and character talks about, you know, a bit broadly here. Which means concern having another relationship somewhere, etc., or their social engagements and etc. The third one, third attribute was the women who said that they're not concerned about negative stereotypes of divorced women. So they having, you know, 95% of the cases when women had these three attributes, they moved on to the outcome. So let's move to the next slide. And so this next one, please. So, okay, this is not from Pakistan or Lebanon, but this is an evaluation I led in Sierra Leone in the Western Africa. In this one, we used a participatory approach. We used a participatory video making because we were working in the slums areas where, I mean, it's very hard due to many reasons to go and gather data. There are multiple languages. The slum situation, people come, people leave. In urban areas, so we trained some people living there, like some slum dwellers, to gather data for us, and then they also produce videos, and these videos are also available on YouTube. If you want, we can always share these as well. A very good example of participatory evaluation. Okay, so next, and I'll just finish in 2 minutes, I promise. Okay, so the next important thing is while you are engaging the communities, it's
1 minute maybe, sorry.
Maybe 1 minute. Okay,
yeah, thank you.
So make sure that you have a feedback and response mechanism available so that you know what is going wrong if in case something goes wrong. And the next slide is about using appropriate ICTs. One thing, ICTs is very, I mean, interesting. I mean, everybody loves it. But then in some context, for example, in the Pakistani example, we were not allowed to use mobile phones because the government doesn't allow use of mobile phone for data collection. So, I mean, there were complications around it, and we were using the Sprockler tool, but then we could work around it. And the next slide is about validate and disseminate. So making sure that the data that you gather, you validate it. And as you can see in this photo, this woman is showing again the Sprockler dot, and she's on a chart, she's showing to the participants where she plotted her dot, where her response was. And this is very interesting because, I mean, these women are like not literate, they can't read and write, but then they could easily understand, you know, where their responses were. This also empowers them. They were very pleased that the evaluators came back to them to close the feedback loop. And I think it is their right for evaluators to go back to them and tell what we are doing with their data, or actually what came out of their data. And please, last slide. Thank you very much. I know I ran over time, but yeah, I hope you find this interesting. Here is my email if anybody of you want to get in touch with me later on after the presentation, and also the Twitter handle. And with this, thank you very much, everybody. And I just want to say one thing, that I have to leave about 15 minutes early today, so I will just put a message and leave I have to take my nephew to the hospital.
Mm.
So thank you very much. Over to you, Umi.
Thank you, Hur, for a very nice presentation and also a great experience from different countries, from Pakistan, Lebanon, and also Sierra Leone. Because Hur has to leave soon, I think we can take up for 2 questions, if that's okay, Pak Gunawan.
Okay.
If this is
Please
fine
go
to
on.
you, okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you.
But actually, we expect that the speaker will also comment on the government presentation. So if Pak Gun want to share his slide for maybe 15 minutes, then we can have a quick feedback from Hur, then Svetlana, if that is fine. What do you think, Hur?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Thank you.
Okay, so 15 minutes for Pak Gunawan, then we can have your feedback first. Okay, yeah. Okay, sorry for this. I hope this new setup will work for everyone. So I think Pak Gunawan, now we can have your insight from the based on the reflection on our speakers here, and then comparing with the implementation in Indonesia. Pak Gunawan, the floor is yours now for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Umi. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me at this session. But please, I want to greet our participant here with Om Swastiwastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, namo buddhaya, dan salam kebajikan. My presentation is about the reflection of the implementation of minimum service standards in the integrated service for women and children victims of violence, and how does the evaluation work. Honestly, I'm not an expert in evaluation nor in gender issues, so I hope my opinion will match your expectations. But I want to say that most my experience, my working experience, is with the local governments, and I know that most of the participants in this session came from local governments. So I hope you can enjoy my presentations. So first of all, I want to share my knowledge about evaluations. It's very often at the government hierarchy, at the national level or in the local level, we do various evaluations. We conduct the evaluation in the meeting, but is it really evaluation in terms of knowledge? Because sometimes I see that when we conduct an evaluation meeting, we just discuss about something and then make an conclusion and then make agreements. That's it. And it's very simple. But in my understanding, evaluation is a cycle process, just like policy. And I refer to Dr. Dylan Niel knowledge about policy evaluations. We can do evaluation in every step of the stage in policy making, such as develop ideas for solution. Before we go there, we can do the evaluation, and before we develop the policy, we can do the evaluation. Next, please. Regarding the MMS, the minimum standard for services, we understand that the MMS is a set of performance indicators that including complaint handling, health services, social rehabilitation, and legal aid and social reintegration for women and child victims of violence. these regulations issued by the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection of Republic of Indonesia. The goals of this regulation is so the local government can provide a minimum standard when they face the woman and child victims of violence. Next, please. The MSS for Integrated Service is issued in 2010. It's already 10 years old. And from the document, I understand that it contains the target that should be achieved at 2014. And now it's already 2021, and I cannot find any report about how the condition on the 2014 is it achieved or not. It's very, very difficult to find the documents. I don't know if any one of you can share it with me. And the regulation is mandated by the law, three laws. They are elimination of domestic violence, law on elimination of human trafficking crimes, and law on pornography. These two laws need to be implemented in the local level. And the minimum standard should be applied at the various institutions at the local level, such as hospitals, sub-district health centers, courts, police institutions, and other institutions that related to women and child victims of violence. Next, please. So what has been done so far in Indonesia? I did a very small research about this, and I understand that Indonesia responds to this issue very, very good. There are many institutions has established due to this issue at the national level, at the provincial, and also at the sub-district level. But in this presentation, I think I will discuss two main achievements that are very related to our discussion this afternoon. The first one is the manual of monitoring and evaluation for MSS. And the second one, the Symphony PPA website. I think it's quite interesting to discuss these two achievements. Next, please. The first one is the MONEV Manual for Minimum Service Standards. I understand that this manual issued by the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection to help the local government and the national government in the providing a better facilitation or place for women and child that involved in this issue. Next, please. The manual is proposed for multi-stakeholder to monitor and evaluate the MMS. And then it helped the policymaker to develop a regular and structured monitoring mechanism. In this regulation, in this manual, it states that the evaluation should be done in the midterm evaluation, and that was should be done in 2012, and the long-term evaluation in the 2014. And the object of the evaluation should be hospitals, sub-districts, health centers, courts, police institutions, and other institutions. Next, please. The manual also stated that the data collected from the field should be represent the urban, rural, and remote area, the highest and the lowest number of violent cases, and the high and low government budgets. And then the MSS monitoring mechanism, it's explain how to monitor in preparation stage, implementation stage, and how to report the monitoring results. And then this is next, please. I will explain it in the next slide. Yes, thank you. The MSS evaluation design, it discussed about.
Ini itu ada nggak di sini?
Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, please continue, Pak.
Yes, thank you, Mbak Uni. MSS evaluation design, it contain about how to do the preparation, the implementation, and also the reporting. Next, please. The second achievement that I would like to discuss in this session is about the information system of women and child protection. I found a very interesting website developed by the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection that could be used as the monitoring and evaluation data resources. We can find a lot of information about women and child victims of violence here. Next, please. The website is intended to be the single data for women and child protection in Indonesia. So every level of government, every level of hierarchy could use this data so they can make a better policy in the future. The website, it's updated by verified user from various national and local institutions in Indonesia. And it contains about many categories, data categories such as case number per provinces, number of victims, ages, location, and etc. Next, please. This is the how it looks like in the website. I put it on my PowerPoint so you can see the dashboard of the website. But you can easily access the website through your laptops and computers or even your mobiles. And what we can see here is you can see the real-time numbers of cases that happened in Indonesia in 2021. And as you can see the map below the dashboard, you can see that there are several darkest region and that show the number of the cases. Next, please. I searched for the Bali province's data, and it showed that a lot of cases appears in Denpasar and Badung Regency. We understand that Bali is a domestic and international tourist destination, and it's very famous in the world. And I think a lot of maybe some cases, I don't know how big is the cases, must be involved the tourists, foreigners. So I think the regulation, the EMS regulation should face the local condition and facilitate the cases related to the Bali condition as the international tourist destinations. Next, please. So how we use the evaluation results. In Indonesia, we have annual development planning. We call it Musrenbang. It began from the lowest level of our hierarchy, but I only put here three hierarchy: is it city regency, provincial, and national. So when we are doing evaluation, the research should be used by the government and use it at the right place and the right time. The national development planning, sorry, can we back to the, thank you. The national midterm development planning was the 5-year planning. So if we put this issue in this document, it will guarantee that the issue will be funded to the next 5 years. It will also happen when we do it at the provincial and city or regency level. Next, please. And conclusion, I think we need to understand that data is very important. So I think the national and local government should promote and facilitate the verified user, whatever they are, to regularly entry data to the SIMPON PPA, because I think it's a very useful website to get real-time data on this issue. But the Symphony PPA website itself should be developed to address the complaint handling, health services, social rehabilitation, legal aid, and social reintegration data, because I cannot find any report about this issue. And the last one, evaluation research should serve every level of governance. Yes, I have experience at the local level and the central level, and at the central level, I usually find that many evaluation reports only serve one level of hierarchy. So it needs to be developed that so the evaluation report could be adapted and used at the lower level as well. Next, please. Oh yeah, thank you very much for your kind attention, and I give the floor back to Mbak Umi. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pak Gunawan, for a very sharp presentation and an eye-opening for us about how is actually the government address these issues using their protocol or platforms. So we have 3 questions here. So I wish that Svetlana, Hur, and also Pak Gunawan may address this question. The first one, on the feminist principle, you mentioned about one important skill on facilitation. Can you elaborate further? Do we need to provide safe environment for women and vulnerable groups, including to those who defending them, and why? And then the second question is, in 2 different country setting, closed versus open system, the idea of evaluation in fragile, conflict, and vulnerable countries or issues seems very challenging to conduct. How many years do you think evaluation can influence those closed system country to a more open one in addressing the fragility, conflict, and vulnerable issues? More importantly, on the gradual change of power construction and social setting where woman is excluded. And then the last one is about the involvement in handling violence against women and children. At least need to involve the participatory approach where involve family, government, the environment, and the commissions for the protection of women and children. local institution. Have this component been involved? I think this is for the government, and also perhaps Svetlana and also Hur can reflect on the experience in other countries, either in Africa or other regions. And then the evaluation approach also needs to take advantage of the local wisdom approach. What about Indonesia with its rich local wisdom? Has been involved yet? Do various best practices for successful approaches in the world also show the success of the local wisdom approach? Yeah, thank you, please, Svetlana, and then Hur, and then Pak Gun.
Thank you for really interesting, insightful questions, and there's not enough time to answer all of them. I'm just saying from my perspective, and I'm sure Hur will agree. So definitely across both of our presentations, and also I think from the third presentation, it's very clear that context is very specific. And the only way that you can use context and understand it and take advantage, and I'm not saying it in a bad way, but use wisdom, the local wisdom, is through using is through using participatory methods. And Hur, I think, gave really good examples to a little bit kind of more theoretical discussion that I provided, although the example that I provided with the safeguard is very similar to what was presented on the minimum standards. And I do come from health background, actually. I worked for 10 years before in the M&E of health, and I know how important it is that the protocols are followed, but also the comprehensive protocols. So it's not just provision of medical services, but there's socioeconomical, the legal support. So those were the dimensions that actually are covered in the kind of discussion of the gender equality and related evaluation. So I think this is kind of really a broad definitions and discussion, but yes, local wisdom. One of the principles of the feminist evaluation is that you know who to ask, what to ask, and you don't make assumptions that you know more as an evaluator, because it is, in fact, always for evaluators important that we are brokers of knowledge, and we present it to evaluations through the lens of those from whom we hear of their experiences. I hope this segues into Hur's, because his examples were really so much more applicable in your context as well, you know, especially in the mostly Muslim societies. And I will leave him there. And I will just say that from my experience at AFDB, which, as you know, Africa is also a lot of large populations are Muslim. So a lot of experiences apply in terms of the role of women, you know, and those dynamics, and conducting focus group discussions just for women and then focus group discussions just for men is one of the ways to get the knowledge from both, because women are sometimes, I have seen that as well, are more shy to talk in front of men if there are kind of certain power dynamics in the society, be it to religion or not to religion. Thank you. I have to run, and it was great. And engage with us in the EVOL Gender Plus, and I'm sure we will provide the slides to all of you. Thank you so much. Happy Friday.
So Svetlana, actually there is another very specific questions if you want to address. So so this is a very specific. So most of the explanation for domestic violence cases that were reported to the police were revoked by the reporter after mediation. And the reporting files were used by the reporter to file for a divorce in a court. So please, can you elaborate or explain whether a divorce case submitted to the court by the wife can be categorized as a domestic violence case, even though it is not reported to the police? Because women can file a divorce if they are left behind for 2 years in a row or not provided with compulsory support for 3 months, are hurt by their body or left or ignored for 6 months, which in our interpretation are all types of domestic violence. So this is very specific.
Very context specific question.
Yes.
I mean, to ask from the evaluation side, you know, if I were coming in and evaluating a project or an intervention that is by the government or, you know, NGOs or anybody else, I mean, the goal is to look at all kinds of evidence. In terms of what stands at court, is something that definitely is the contextual, and I would not even dare to talk about that because it really is about the legal system in Indonesia. So for the context of this discussion is all evidence has to be used. There has to be care in how it is used, because there's also rules of, the privacy and for how those discussions are held with women interviewees or interviewers versus men, and who facilitates. As you said, if it was presented after mediation, it is a great step. It sounds like it was a great step already. So continuity and monitoring, the progress, and then making conclusions that as a result of mediation, this and this happened, I think is already a great lesson to learn. I hope this answers a little bit, and I think Hur probably can answer actually better.
Thank you so much, Svetlana. And then
thank you,
Hur, okay. Hur, please.
Okay, thank you very much,
yeah.
Umi. Well, I mean, the question number 2 around the closed system countries and the gradual shift, breaking the power structure. I really don't have answer to when or how. I mean, it's a very, very broad questions, and all the contexts are different. But then we need to look at what are our role as evaluators. I mean, that is my specialty, and that's what I do. So I think, looking at more, as Svetlana's presentation was there, more looking at a more systematic approach or more systematic systems level, and working at very grassroots level. Looking at more transformational change, especially in terms of gender, would be more useful in such context. As they say in the SDG discussions, that think globally, work locally. So maybe, that could be something useful. And again, from the data and evaluation point of view, I think an important thing would be to partner with other, agencies, think tanks, universities, or the civil society organizations that are working at very grassroots levels. More relevant data could be attained. Change in power dynamics, more policy level decisions. We are evaluators. What we can do is we can bring data in the eyes of the decision makers, the policy makers, the influencers actually. In Indonesian case, it could be also the religious leaders, engaging them. And then I would say, my last principle on dissemination and making use of it is the thing we can work on. Most of us are either statisticians or background in economics, or if not that, widely in development studies, or maybe experience of working, gathering data. But then if we also connect it with making sure that the results we have gathered are interpreted at the policy level, at in the religious gathering, for example, in Jummah prayers and Friday prayers, if a religious leader talks about Umi's latest evaluation and say, respected evaluator Umi did this evaluation, and it says that this leads to that based on that evaluation. So that is where, it is not our role. As evaluator, we don't, convene Jummah prayers and etc. Then we can make sure that our evaluations are interpreted at that level. So one mistake that we do is we write very long reports. Most of the time there are tables and numbers and percentages, and literally it's just us who are interested in seeing these things because we are evaluation geeks. But then politicians, decision makers, community leaders, religious leaders, they need very simple statements, easy to grasp, easy to understand. So maybe if we start thinking towards that direction, then we can probably influence the decision maker, that can break the power structures, that can make the countries, a bit more open to change and etc. So that is mainly it, I think, from my side. And I would really have to leave. Umi, my nephew, has his appointment at the hospital. I mean, a bit of family responsibilities last minute because my brother-in-law had to travel somewhere.
Okay.
But it was really lovely to speak to you all, to share the experience we have got from different countries and etc. And also listen to the excellent presenters. MONEV Studio, you really managed to grab them here, have them here. So take care, have a very good rest of your day, and inshallah ta'ala we will speak soon. So people who are keeping fast, please remember in prayers. Ma'assalam. Fi amanillah. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
take care.
Thank you. So let's give some applause for Hur and also for Svetlana. So they need to leave soon because it's 10 a.m. Morning in European time. So they have to leave for meeting and also to the hospital. Thank you, Hur. Let's keep in touch, and then we will continue the discussion with Pak Gunawan. Bye-bye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bye-bye. Waalaikumsalam.
Bapak Ibu, we will continue the discussion with Pak Gunawan. I'm not sure if we still have some foreigners in the participant list. Otherwise, we can discuss in Bahasa. So Pak Gunawan, we have some questions for you.
Okay.
Please feel free to address. Thank you, Pak. Kayaknya masih ada peserta dari luar negeri. Kalau nggak ada, kita bisa diskusi dalam bahasa Indonesia. Silakan Pak Gunawan. Ya.
Maaf, ini tadi pertanyaannya yang dari Pemalang ini sepertinya sudah sangat substansial ya. Saya nggak bisa memberikan jawaban yang mungkin memuaskan, tapi tanggapan saya sendiri terkait hal ini memang kalau saya baca beberapa laporan terkait penyediaan layanan ini di unit-unit yang terpisah, baik itu yang dikelola Pemda, pengadilan, polisi, atau mungkin juga pihak ketiga yang didanai oleh pemerintah, saya belum pernah menemukan laporan yang merupakan hasil dari evaluasi bersama atau collaboration evaluation yang bisa menunjukkan bahwa semua pihak yang tadi saya sebutkan itu sudah memiliki pemahaman yang sama. Sehingga ketika muncul kasus-kasus seperti yang disampaikan dari saudara kita di Kabupaten Pemalang ini, sepertinya mungkin ada masalah pemahaman juga itu di situ. Mungkin itu yang bisa saya sampaikan, Mbak.
Baik. Nah, berikutnya ada pertanyaan Pak dari Pak Murjana. Jadi pelibatan penanganan kekerasan terhadap perempuan dan anak setidaknya perlu melibatkan secara partisipatif keluarga, pemerintah, lingkungan komisi atau komite perlindungan perempuan dan anak, termasuk kelembagaan lokal misalnya di Bali Agat. Nah, apakah komponen tersebut sudah dilibatkan? Mungkin sejauh ini observasinya seperti apa, Pak? Terus pendekatan dalam evaluasi juga perlu memanfaatkan pendekatan kearifan lokal atau local wisdom. Nah, bagaimana dengan Indonesia dengan kekayaan kearifan lokalnya? Apakah sudah dilibatkan? Seperti itu. Nah, tadi yang untuk international best practices itu sudah dijelaskan. Yeah. Nah, mungkin Bapak Ibu dari Dinas Sosial, Ibu Mariam ya tadi ya, mungkin juga bisa menjawab. Terima kasih.
Mohon dibantu karena saya nggak terlalu menguasai isu ini ya.
Ya.
Silakan, mungkin ada yang bisa memberi tanggapan.
Iya, Ibu Yogianti tadi. Oke. Atau itu kita bisa bawa nanti diskusinya di MONEV Chat ya, Bapak Murjana. Tapi paling enggak tadi yang dijelaskan Svetlana itu menarik untuk kita kupas lagi. Gitu Pak Murjana ya?
Ya, saya kira menarik sekali karena di Indonesia ini kearifan lokal luar biasa terkait dengan. Ya.
Betul sekali Pak Murjana. Nah, Pak Gunawan, kami juga merasa topik ini sangat ini ya, menurut saya ini termasuk advanced evaluation. Jadi evaluasi yang lebih kompleks dan lebih tingkatannya lebih sulit gitu. Nah, kalau saya coba simak tadi paparan Svetlana itu menarik, bagaimana sesungguhnya sebagian aspeknya kayak misalnya pendekatan prinsip-prinsip fasilitasi yang membuat safe environment untuk para perempuan, anak, misalnya FGD dengan mereka itu secara khusus sehingga mereka bisa bebas bicara, mengutarakan pendapatnya, termasuk misalnya ruang-ruang aduan atau sekretariat komplain untuk KDRT ini dibikin memang spesifik di mana yang menerima bukan laki-laki misalnya. Artinya safe environment untuk proses fasilitasi ini menjadi sangat penting. Ini salah satu prinsip-prinsip yang bisa diurai dari paparan yang disampaikan oleh Svetlana maupun Hur tadi, termasuk untuk memperkaya atau mungkin menyempurnakan sistem yang Pak Gun tadi sampaikan. Cuman saya setuju ini sangat kompleks gitu dan perlu waktu untuk mencerna informasi yang kita dapatkan tadi. Nah, Bapak Ibu, jika tidak ada pertanyaan lagi atau ada tambahan atau semacam closing remarks dari Pak Gunawan?
Baik, terima kasih. Yang ingin saya sampaikan pertama itu bahwa karena partisipan ini sebagian besar dari pemerintah daerah ya, dalam hal ini mungkin dari teman-teman dari Bapeda maupun dari Dinas Sosial ataupun dari Dinas Pemberdayaan Perempuan dan Perlindungan Anak, maka memang fokus saya dari tadi adalah bagaimana teman-teman yang bekerja di instansi tersebut bisa memahami bagaimana cara memanfaatkan hasil evaluasi. Ini yang sangat penting. Paling sering kita ini melakukan rapat evaluasi. Kalau spanduknya tulisannya rapat evaluasi, tapi begitu kita join di dalamnya itu sama sekali tidak kelihatan seperti apa evaluasi itu dilaksanakan. Dan saya sangat berterima kasih sekali ada MONEV Studio ini yang bisa memberi pencerahan ini kepada teman-teman di Pemda. Saya sendiri sebenarnya baru mengenal evaluasi ini ketika ketemu Mbak Umi ini di PMGSC ya Mbak Umi ya.
Betul sekali.
Di mana diperkenalkan theory of change dan lain sebagainya. Dan saya berharap dari teman-teman dari Pemda ini bisa menerapkan itu di pekerjaannya masing-masing sehingga kebijakan-kebijakan yang kita buat itu bisa lebih tepat sasaran dan lebih efisien, lebih efektif seperti itu. Karena kalau kita melakukan evaluasi hanya dengan mengandalkan pengamatan saja atau observasi atau menerima laporan atau ada laporan dari masyarakat, mungkin itu kurang tepat juga. Kita membutuhkan data lain seperti dokumen, seperti hasil laporan-laporan seperti yang disampaikan di website Simponi tadi. Mungkin seperti itu dari saya, Mbak Umi. Terima kasih dan mohon maaf apabila ada kekurangan dalam presentasi saya. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Pak Gunawan untuk insight-nya dan refleksi juga semacam take home message ya buat kita semuanya. Kami MONEV Studio sebagai bagian dari organisasi masyarakat sipil senang sekali bisa berkiprah atau berpartisipasi untuk memajukan MONEV di Indonesia seperti itu. Nah, ini juga bagian dari misi sosial kami. Jika Bapak Ibu ada request tentang topik-topik yang menarik untuk perlu dibedah lagi atau dimajukan, silakan Bapak Ibu untuk menghubungi kami. Nah, Bapak Ibu jangan lupa nanti download aplikasi MONEV 4.0, MONEV 4.0. Di situ seluruh materi literasi itu udah lumayan kaya, mulai dari konsepsi tentang pembangunan, prakteknya, terus kompleksitasnya, dan berbagai varian evaluasinya. Nah, di situ juga ada fitur MONEV Chat, di mana nanti kita akan terus terhubung untuk dapat berdiskusi. Nah, Bapak Ibu, di penghujung diskusi kita sore ini, waktu kami kembalikan kepada Ibu Yogianti selaku Sekretaris Dinas Sosial Provinsi Bali untuk penutupan. Terima kasih dari saya selaku moderator sekaligus mewakili rekan-rekan yang ada di MONEV Studio. Jika ada perkataan yang kurang berkenan, mohon maaf. Terima kasih juga kepada rekan-rekan MONEV Studio, ada Mas Iwan, Mbak Ria, Mbak Ligwina, Mas Nailul yang sudah cukup cekatan memberikan terjemahan simultan. Silakan Ibu Yogianti. Atau dari Dinas Sosial untuk menutup? Atau cukup ya? Baik, kalau gitu ke Mbak Ria sebagai koordinator dari MONEV Safari, silakan ditutup acaranya. Sampai ketemu lagi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih, Mi.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Om Swastiastu.
Terima kasih MONEV Studio.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu.
Terima kasih.
Mas Iwan, Mbak Umi.
Sama-sama Bapak Ibu.
Terima kasih semuanya. Assalamualaikum.
Terima kasih, Mbak Regina. Iwan.
Assalamualaikum. Terima kasih.
Ya.
Terima kasih.
Ya.
Mari kita, sebelum acara ditutup, mari kita berfoto bersama terlebih dahulu. Ibu Bapak bisa dibuka kameranya masing-masing.
Sudah dibuka.
Oh iya, Bapak Ibu mohon nyalakan videonya. Nah ini kadang kita lupa foto.
Nggak ada kenang-kenangan.
Karena nggak ketemu langsung. Mohon dinyalakan videonya Bapak Ibu.
Ya.
Iya. Ibu Sri, Ibu Niwayan, Ibu Sri, Ibu Pak Gede, Ibu Ida Putu, Pak Ayu. Ya. 1, 2.
Mantap.
Baik, cukup ya.
Ya, terima kasih.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Gunawan, Pak Gede Wiratama, salam kenal. Bapak dari Karangasem.
Salam Bu Umi, salam kenal.
Iya, salam kenal. Terima kasih banyak Pak.
Yeah.
Terima kasih Mbak Umi, teman-teman semua, Bapak Ibu, izin dulu.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Gunawan. Kapan-kapan
Ya.
ketemu Pak ya.
Siap, sama-sama Mbak Umi.
Iya Pak, makasih banyak.
Oke.
Bu Vini, terima kasih. Pak Jamaat, terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih sama-sama Umi. Ya, mohon pamit.
Iya
Assalamualaikum.
Bu, iya Pak. Silakan. Waalaikumsalam. Pak Arif Nurrahman. Terima kasih Pak. Salam kenal. Ibu dari KGP ya?
Iya.
Apa itu Bu ya?
Kesetaraan gender dan pembangunan.
Oh, menarik-menarik. Ibu kantornya di mana itu?
Dari Disdalduk KB dan PP. Dinas Pengendalian Penduduk ini dari PPPA Kabupaten Lumajang.
Oh, dari P3A Lumajang. Mantap. Terima kasih, Bu. Tapi ini berarti
Dinas PPPA Kabupaten Lumajang.
Di bawah dinas berarti ya, bukan CSO. Baik-baik. Terima kasih. Terima kasih.
Ya,
wah, itu sama dengan Mbak Ria, Bu. Asli
juga Lumajang, Ibu.
Oh, ya. Salam kenal, Mbak.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu semuanya. Tetap sehat ya.